Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So we're going to try to wrap up hadith number 17 today of the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. This is a hadith that talks about a very important value and concept in Islam called ihsan. We've been looking at it for a few weeks. I don't think we met last Monday because it was Memorial Day. Is that true? But I think prior to that, we were looking at this for 2 or 3 weeks and talked about it through a variety of angles and standpoints. The last session that we met, we spent a good chunk of it looking at just what our tradition speaks in terms of animal rights and so many different things that the Prophet ﷺ talked about in terms of caring for animals, because the Hadith speaks about at the end the slaughter of an animal. And we looked at some verses from the Quran that also speak about this idea of how we relate to these aspects of creation. Within this prism of identifying like a key ingredient in this, in these various hadith, where the Prophet is speaking about kind of, companions that separated a mother bird from her babies, or an instance that speaks about an ant that was killed, and then the entire colony of ants was killed rather than just one. And we talked about how collective punishment is not a concept in our tradition that's validated, that you don't kind of harm the collective for the actions of the individual. But in many of these situations, the idea was that a person that had a kind of privileged background or a positionality of power in their favor was still exerting righteousness towards one that was not as strong as they were in the balance of power, right? So this man who gives the thirsty dog water, the prostitute who gives the thirsty dog water, right? They don't have to do this. They're doing right by one that has less power and less privilege by them. So the exertion isn't just of ihsan towards one that has authority over you, that I'm doing right by my boss, or I'm doing right by my parents, or whatever kind of relationship dynamic that exerts imbalance in the favor of the other. But where I have the ability to exert power over someone, I'm still exerting righteousness towards them, right? Does anybody remember when we talked about any of these things? Yeah. Let's pretend like we do. Great. So we're going to try to wrap up with this hadith today and look at just a few other points relevant to it. But people want to pull it up. It's hadith number 17. And if we can have somebody read the Arabic and the English of it, that would be great. So if you want to just pull up the 17th hadith of the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, you could just search for something like hadith 17 Nawawi, and it'll come up. Does anybody have it?
I have the English.
Yeah, go for it.
Verily, Allah has prescribed proficiency in all things. Thus, if you kill, kill well, and if you slaughter, slaughter well. Let each of you sharpen his blade, and let him spare suffering to the animal he slaughters.
Great. Can somebody read the Arabic? Yeah, go for it.
عن أبي يعلى شداد بن أوس رضي الله عنه عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إن الله كتب الإحسان على كل شيء، فإذا قتلتم فأحسنوا القتلة، وإذا ذبحتم فأحسنوا الذبح، وليحد أحدكم شفرته وليرق ذبيحته. رواه مسلم.
Jazakallah khair. So one of the things that's important before we move on is when we're translating this word ihsan, we don't want to think about it in the term of like perfection, where it gets translated in that way. And I think the nuance in the translation is really tough because it assumes that the ideal for us is to pursue perfection rather than something that has kind of refinement and excellence to it. Does that make sense? And it's hard because religion can be quite intimidating for people. And the understanding that us working to our progressive best, rooted in a recognition of this hadith, in Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that Allah has put this thing of ihsan, prescribed it on everything, do you know? And so we said in the first time we were talking about this hadith, that means that when you're reflecting and inventorying on how you accomplished or achieved in the course of a day, you can look at every single one of your actions through the prism of this thing of ihsan. Was it present? To what extent was it present? But you can always have an opportunity to grow and improve in some capacity. It doesn't mean that the default state has to be that you're terrible, that you're not just going from bad to good, but even something that's good can be better. Does that make sense? But there's not a purpose that's allocated to us as human creation outlined in the Quran that says our goal is to become angelic, right? Like you're human. Embedded in that is the idea that you're going to make mistakes. This is why we're called insan. And there's two understandings of kind of the etymological breakdown of this. One denotes intimacy and the other denotes forgetfulness, right? But the idea is that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to kind of mess up. That's just embedded. Pretty much every time the word insan is mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in a way that also denotes like some kind of shortcoming that we have. Do you know? But you don't want to think about this in the sense that I create now within myself an unhealthy relationship with anxiety because nothing is ever good enough. And I'm somehow supposed to adopt this kind of futile pursuit of perfection. That's not what the pursuit of ihsan is supposed to bring us towards. It's supposed to bring us to a place that we're trying to improve, and you can do that without beating up on yourself. Does that make sense? Right? So as we're looking at a couple of these things now in the remainder of this hadith, the two examples that the Prophet gives when he's talking about ihsan, he talks about one, the idea of like killing, and if you're going to kill, you kill well. And he talks about slaughtering and how that's done well also. And we said that, for example, the same way when he talks in the first hadith, innamal a'malu bin niyat, in this hadith collection, indeed actions are by their intentions. And he gives then two examples to extrapolate the principle in that hadith as a teaching tool. He says, so if you make the migration for the sake of Allah and his messenger, right? Or if someone migrates to, a worldly matter or to marry some woman, right? But it's a similar construct. Here's the principle, innamal a'malu binniyat, and here's two things that illustrate like an idea of this. So here you have a similar teaching tool. Here's the principle. In Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that indeed Allah has prescribed ihsan on everything. And then he gives two kind of examples to further illustrate the principle. These examples are given in a way that most people are probably not thinking about how you can do this with excellence and precision to it. This act of like killing someone and this act of slaughtering an animal. Because at that time, they're coming out of a place where this was a population that fundamentally didn't really think twice about how they did these things. They were burying daughters alive, for example, right? They were engaged in a lot of kind of abhorrent practice and atrocious practice that rendered mutilation and torture. These are not things that our religion advocates for. And it's important to understand that there's still ethics that go into those types of practices as well. There's a lot that we find in the hadith that speak about the condemnation of torture or mutilation. These are not like tools or vehicles that are encouraged to be practiced upon in any situation or circumstance. And so, in this regard, the act of even engaging of killing somebody has a sense of ethic to it that trickles down and recognizes there's still a human on the other end of this. Do you know? So you're not in a place where you're looking to, on the field of battle, just grotesquely like create unnecessary like mutilation of somebody. You're not in a place where torture is something that you are encouraged towards or you engage in some way. You want to think about it and juxtapose it to the gross realities in the ways that humans fundamentally treat humans today and dehumanize and take out the humanity aspect of it. Do you know? So the default, when we talked about the previous hadith, we spoke in depth about the sanctity of life that this religion calls upon as a universal ethic, and it sanctifies all life regardless of background, regardless of culture, creed, race, class. Like there's a shared dignity in humanity, right? وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam, that all the children of Adam are elevated, the Quran says. You don't see that within the reality of like conflict, war, but even systems of justice. It does not equate equivalency amongst people of various backgrounds, racially, ethnically, socioeconomically, and the mode in which engagement of people is rooted is highly torturous and doesn't admonish but embraces like mutilation and disfigurement and all kinds of things. Evolution of practice that is harmful has a key kind of role in this execution of harm. So, you know, an example that we've used, I think, maybe in this class or in different classes, like, you know, technology that you have today is very different than the 1.0 version of this. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, I don't know if people are as old as I am in the room, but the first cell phone I had, because I was like a spoiled brat, was probably when I was like 15 or 16 years old. And I had a flip phone that was a StarTAC digital phone that somebody might not even know what that is. And then the next phone I had was like this brick that was a walkie-talkie and a phone that people would use on like construction sites. And my brother thought that we should all just have this in our family because we could walkie-talkie each other while we also could talk to each other on the phone. I don't know why you would need a walkie-talkie if you had the phone to call each other in the first place. But this thing was like this thick and literally is like a brick that I had a bag that I could wear it across my chest because of how large the phone was. And, technology has evolved and you can create all kinds of things that you can fundamentally comprehend. And just like there's those things that have evolved, vice has also evolved. So the way, for example, someone could gossip 200 years ago is very different than how you can gossip today, right? The evolution of it is very distinct. Similarly, the way people have built out weaponry and mechanism to like murder people at a mass level is insane. There's no humanization or understanding of what's going on. You literally live in a world right now where there are babies that are starving to death from famine in various conflicts around the world, inclusive of what we see that's happening to our sisters and brothers in Gaza, and the occupation that's taking place there. And understand and recognize that the evolution of dehumanization contributes to this. And this is why it's important to understand that our religion also exercises an ethic when you have to get to the place where there is the potential for actually taking someone else's life. And there's still a sense of dignity and honor that goes into the fact that that's another human being on the other end of it. And I'm not in a place where I dehumanize so much that I am willful in engaging in all kinds of abhorrent, oppressive, mutilative, kind of torturous practice towards another human being. Does that make sense? Right? How do you get to a place where white people are comfortable doing to Emmett Till what they do? And his mother makes the difficult decision of an open casket funeral to show just how ugly people can be in the way that they treat another human being. He shouldn't have been killed in the first place, but the grotesque manner in which they kill him, she purposely shows the world to say, this is what you think is a superior race, that it's willing to do this to another human being. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And the Quraysh in Mecca, they're doing disgusting things to people all across the board. How do you get to a place where you can fundamentally concoct the idea that, hey, this slave, Bilal ibn Rabah, why don't we strap him to the desert and throw a boulder on his chest, right? Who comes up with this as an idea? Khabab ibn Arat, let's put him on a bed of flaming coals. You see? How does somebody think about that? This Muslim woman, she proclaims Islam. Let's put her in cast iron armor under the Arabian sun when it's in its highest, so her body literally cooks in the heat, right? That's crazy that somebody can think that way. Do you know? Just because you come numb to it, Allah didn't give us spiritual gifts. So we build the technology that then arms the weaponry that drops the drone on the innocent population. Do you know? So just because I'm not flying the plane or manning the plane or loading the plane, you built the tech that created what it was that lended itself towards this. Do you see what I'm saying? And in this tradition, they're telling a population in a Meccan society that didn't even think twice about how it was that it exerted power over one that they held power over, that you can't treat other human beings in this way. There's an ethic that goes even into this. It is not a universal ethic that humanity just embraces around the world, that we sanctify human life. It is an Islamic ethic that has universal application, but most of the world does not apply this in a prism of universality. Yeah, I told Sheikh Faz we could bring it in here. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. They had food left over from another event. So Sheikh Faz said if people want to eat, I know people here don't really like eating food when it comes into the room, but just in case anybody wants to eat something, there's going to be some food in the back of the room in a little bit, inshallah. So that's one part to this that we don't have to delve so deeply into, because in one of the previous hadith, we talked about this a lot in reference to like capital punishment, sanctity of life. You can go back and listen to that. But here, this is what it is that's being told. Like, you can even have ihsan when you are in this act of, God forbid, may Allah protect us from ever having to exert any decision making of this kind, where you'd fundamentally have to take the life of another human being. You know, that there's still an exertion of understanding ihsan in that moment. Does that make sense? Right? And people just don't have this today. Do you know? They're very willful in degrading and denigrating entire populations. The relevance to us is that you got to take steps to get to a place. Do you know? So you might not be the one that is pulling the trigger, but if you're willfully seated or silent in the face of narrative that constructs now these hierarchies around race and class, or you buy into it in your own stereotypes, you got to go to step 1 before you go to step 2. Do you get what I mean? And if you think that you are better than somebody by virtue of what exactly? The color of your skin, the texture of your hair, the accent that you have versus what they have. You're in this mode where verses of the Quran that tell us things like, don't even get close to zina, right? Like you want to stay away from what is bringing you to a path that is the path towards haram. And a key variable in the dehumanizing of another individual is rooted in everything that whiteness, anti-blackness calls us towards, right? A superiority of the self that is rooted in the assumption of the inferiority of someone else by virtue of a variable that is not what it is that we understand as Muslims to be what creates those things. We do have stratification in our religion in certain regards, right? So we do believe that the prophets of God were the best people. Does that make sense? If somebody says, like, is there a sense of hierarchy in certain ways? Like, yeah, like we do think that there's certain individuals. The Hadith tell us the 4 best women ever created, right? Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, Maryam, the mother of Isa, right? And Fatima bint Muhammad. So somebody says, are there people who are better than others? Like, this is Hadith. These 4 women were better than all the rest of the women created. Do you know? That's just what it is, right? But nobody in this religion is saying what this society calls to. In fact, when the Prophet makes his farewell khutbah, he says the opposite of it. So it's just ingrained, right? A black does not have superiority over white, or white does not have superiority over black. An Arab does not have superiority over a non-Arab. A non-Arab does not have superiority over an Arab, other than by piety and good actions, right? Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most elevated of you in Allah's eyes are the ones that have the most taqwa. And if you have real taqwa, consciousness of God, that's what ihsan is. And ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarah, you worship Allah as if you can see him. Then you couldn't be racist. Like you can't be from the muttaqeen and be racist. You can't be from the muttaqeen and be sexist. You can't be bigoted. You can't be hateful. The two things don't go hand in hand. So if you want to get yourself in check that doesn't intellectualize people's struggles or validate that somebody being oppressed or mistreated actually makes sense, one of the avenues to get yourself in check is to ensure that you don't hold racism in your heart. And the Hadith tells us that even somebody who has a mustard seed worth of arrogance in their heart will not be given entrance into Jannah. Allah protect us from it. So if you think you're smarter than somebody, and you got to really step to yourself in a place of vulnerability and indicate to yourself, like, well, then why do you only hang out with the people you hang out with? Whose opinions do you seek on certain matters? Who have you ever prayed behind, and have you never prayed behind someone of a certain background before? Why? And how does that play a role? Like if you started a business tomorrow, who would be the people you hire to work in that business? What would it be based off of? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? And the connection point is important to understand. There's beauty inherently a part of ihsan, and there's no beauty in racism. It's the ugliest thing. And it creates, through narratives constructed on fear, that buy into our own implicit sense of discrimination and bias, a dehumanizing that then justifies and validates what it is that takes place to people and populations around the world. You don't want to be a part of that mess, right? So you start to confront it within and say, ihsan is not this. So then what is it? It's about recognizing the beauty and the diversity that Allah has created us as, and not to let yourself internalize racism and become self-loathing nor loathe somebody else to a place where you can justify and validate like mistreatment. I think it's better that they, ship all of these people out of these places, right? Homeless people make me feel uncomfortable. That's like gross thinking. Do you know what I mean? You're discomforted in a way where you validate like these processes, you know? You think gentrification is good for your neighborhood is not good for is not good for anybody. Do you know what I mean? Islam is about revitalizing places, not like gentrifying places. Do you see? And these become the avenues that get us to start to dehumanize in certain ways and start to believe that somehow I'm entitled to what it is that I have. I'm good at like this type of stuff. In Sunni Islam, it also gives an indication by extension that that sense of mutilation is not prescribed back to one's own being or body, right? This is why like you wouldn't have permanency to change of your physical body within Islam from a Sunni standpoint. In Shia Islam, the fiqh is a little different. This is why, for example, like Shia Muslims can have tattoos, but Sunni Muslims aren't supposed to have tattoos, right? Allah knows best, do you know? But you're in a place where, like, the root of it is that there's a certain dignity and honor of the body, do you know? And the permanency of it becomes one variable potentially of understanding that as mutilation of the self, right? And the physical body in that way. In Shia Islam, they understand that like the physical body remains and like the ruh is what moves forward. So that gets factored into some of these things. Do you get what I mean? Right? But like being in a place where like just think about the history of humanity. There's people who the way like farmers will brand cows to mark them, they brand human beings. They take hot pieces of metal and they inflame it. And then while it's burning, they'll put that on the body of another human being to be able to mark them in their slavery, right? That's crazy. How do you get to a place where you can see an individual as a commodity? And in this religion, it's saying, hey, even in this regard, there's got to be ihsan in how it is that you engage. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's take a pause for a second and maybe we can have everybody just move up because we're going to start to put some of this food out. So can we ask everybody who's like towards the back just to come in closer? So there's room for the food tables to get set up. And just because I'm talking a lot, secondly, if you could turn to the persons next to you, what are you taking away so far from this conversation? What is it bringing up for you? Let's discuss. If you don't know the names of the people sitting next to you, exchange some names. But what's coming up for everyone so far, and then we'll come back and talk about it. And then the food will be set up, and people can grab some of that too. But go ahead.
I feel like it's a close even when like you might need to be in a place where like you have taking someone's life, you still have to do it because they are it doesn't whatever they've done doesn't give you the right to like willing to do it. And that's like good to think about. Because a lot of us remember like, this person, like, these people are committing genocide. Like, these are the things that you kill someone, you kill them, like in this.
think like part of this is having mercy on the punishment. Mercy
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
I don't know. It makes you think of help your Muslim brother. They're being pressed, help them.
Yeah.
It's like how do you do it? I'm not.
It's like how do you help someone who's an oppressor? It's you stop them from doing the oppression.
Also, your line of teaching just made me think of that.
Yeah. It's a very good hadith. Yeah. So there's also like if you're ever harmed by someone, you are allowed to do this, but not more. Is key. Like you cannot be like you cannot go beyond what has been done to you. And it's better to not seek out. So like Islam constantly promoting humanity rather than just straight killing.
I did also mention that but when you're just talking about this, it's like that sounds like really
Yeah.
as in, every time I hear someone converting, it's not open like the speaker's corner. It's always like the companionship thing.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I saw the way you treated these people.
Yeah, like what like you see that it sounds it changes perspective on them. People start to think what like we haven't established that any of the best at your job, the best most kind person.
Yeah, like the way you deal with everyone. Like a lot of people have been converted to Islam because they see
Okay.
even after all this.
What are some of the things we're talking about? They're still bringing the food over. Yeah. What are we discussing so far? Yeah.
We were discussing how like ihsan is like oftentimes like one of the biggest forms of da'wah that like people get, because it's like if you have complete ihsan in everything that you do, and that's everything from like your actual like worship and also to the things that don't seem like worship, like if you're in war and you need to kill someone, your ihsan and everything in that is an outward thing that people see, and it draws people to Islam. So like the fact that you're making an effort to be the most humane even when you're at war against people who are going against you, and even to that point you're still trying to make sure that you do everything as humane as possible. People see the ihsan, and that's what draws people to Islam.
Yeah. Other thoughts? What are we taking away so far? Is he bringing more stuff, or is that everything? Huh?
I didn't ask.
You don't know? Yeah. Is anybody in the mood to eat something? You are? Yeah? Okay. Why don't we take like a quick 5-minute pause if people want to just grab some food? The only reason why we're doing that is because if you're fasting, like, don't eat because it's not done. But we're not going to have time at the end because the building will close. So, and we don't want the food to go to waste. So people want to grab food right now. I don't mind if you eat while we're like having the halakha, but let's just do that really quickly and then we'll resume in like 5 minutes. So feel free to grab some stuff.
When's the building close?
The building closes at 8, but we keep it open till 9 for Maghrib.
Okay.
So Maghrib is at like, what time? I don't know. What time is Maghrib? Yeah. So by the time everybody's done with Maghrib, it'll be pretty close to the time we have to leave, and then, and we have to clean everything up by 9 too. That's why. Yeah.
there something after the Hajj? Like this goes until 7:30, right?
This goes till Maghrib time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What is the book that you have?
Oh, if anybody wants a copy, I had extra copies of this book. It's called The Prophet's Pulpit by Khalid Latif. I have 3 copies left. Anybody wants them? You want them? Okay, great.
Okay.
Sorry. I haven't read it. They sent us 5. They sent me 5. And so I took it home. And Sheikh Faz took one. But you can have mine if you want. I'll bring it back. Yeah. I was cleaning out my office because my last day officially was this past weekend. So I had to take a bunch of stuff home. So since the building opened in 2012. No. Have you ever seen my office? So I had like all these people just kept leaving tons of notes on my door. So taking all the notes off of my door was interesting. But I think what's going to be weird, like I came into the building today and I didn't know if my ID card was going to work, but it did. It worked. So I think when that doesn't work anymore, that'll probably be so strange. Huh? I'm going to have to fill out the visitor form. Yeah. So we'll see how it is to live on the other side. For
Give them your idea. Like, I don't see you in the system.
Yeah, I know.
There's a chance they could reject your.
They could, yeah. They couldn't put me through. That's all of these things are very, very real things. Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, so be generous with what you're taking. If you're fasting and you want to make a plate for yourself, feel free also so you have it later. That just might be a thing you could do as well, inshallah. Yeah. But I think we want to try to finish all of it as best as we can, just so we can get. No, I'm okay. Yeah, I am. Yeah, but I don't want. I'm gonna eat when I get home. So.
Really a Swedish monkey.
We're gonna get back Jackson to the place.
Huh?
We're gonna get these to the new place.
I think so. Do you want them?
Take one out.
Just take one for yourself. Yeah. No, we're not. We're definitely not taking any from here.
Hey, I take that.
No. It's gonna it'll have its own kind of nicely designed mihrab and member and stuff. So yeah.
No, they moved the mic
Yeah, I don't know,
to a
man.
more reasonable spot.
I'm not sure how it all works. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to grab anything? Feel free to get up at your leisure and take more if you like. We just want to try to finish all of that as best as we can, inshallah. Great. So, any other thoughts on that part of the hadith? So the last part to it, the last week we went through like a bunch of different hadith and ayat that just talked about what offering an insight on like how our religion speaks about just animal rights and how we take care of animals and how you don't abuse and oppress and kind of the ajr and reward in caring for animals and doing right by animals. And so the other example that the Prophet uses in this hadith, alayhi salam, is about the slaughtering of an animal. And I thought it'd be good, especially because we're around the time of Eid al-Adha, where there is one of the kind of ritual slaughters that takes place in our tradition, to kind of talk about that a little bit and what goes into that as well. And so I'm going to, I don't know if any of you took like the intro to like prayer and wudu class I did like a couple of summers ago. But we're looking at that from the standpoint of Hanafi fiqh. And one of the texts we were looking at was called Ascent to Felicity. So in a bit, we'll kind of just look at the section on that talks about slaughtering practices, just a few pages in this fiqh text. And you can find the PDF really easily, Ascent to Felicity. But there are entire guidelines that go into this. So we spoke more broadly last week about the particulars of animal rights in Islam, and how that's like a foundational ethic that goes in. And to the extent that the Hadith nuances this to like a sense of ethic that goes in to even when you're slaughtering the animal that you're going to consume. And there's a lot of different Hadith that speak about this. More broadly speaking, the slaughter that we have is not like done just in terms of when you and I want to like eat food, right? And we'll talk today about like some of the different perspectives and opinions that go into this. And there are varied opinions, so orthodoxy in our tradition was never one that kind of ran away from different opinions. There's certain things that there's not different opinions about in Islam, right? There's one God and that's it. So if somebody says, I'm Muslim, but I don't believe in God, or I'm Muslim, but I think there's 2 gods or 5 gods, you can say, well, there's no different opinions on that. In Islam, there's one God, right? Does that make sense? But you do have different opinions on a lot of like matters within the tradition, including on what is deemed to be like permissible and impermissible when it comes to the consumption of particular animals that are deemed lawful to eat. And we can talk about that in a bit. But this idea of slaughtering in Islam is something that has guidelines and ethics to it also. And it goes into the idea of how do you honor the rights of creation. One of the times of the year that there's particular ritual slaughter is for Eid al-Adha, which is this Friday, right? May Allah bless us to reach it and take benefit from it. And part of the tradition of that holiday in the Abrahamic narrative, irhamakullah, is that you would slaughter like a goat or a lamb or a sheep, or at a larger level, a cow or a camel. There's different opinions in the different schools on whether this is categorically an obligation to do. So in the Hanafi school, it's considered to be wajib for every individual who essentially like gives zakah, right? You have the means, like it's obligatory. And the other schools is considered to be an emphasized sunnah, a sunnah mu'akkada. And some of the schools don't even require it to be. Yes. Do you want me to come outside and talk to you right now? Okay. Sorry. Great. People just want to talk to each other. I'll be right back. Yeah. What do you do?
I'm also suffering. Full time? Full time. What company? I'm not I got fired. Last year, April 2024, because I was in the sit against their contract with Israel. I'm like, no, why are you terminating people? I got 3 companies that have major deals. Who was the person? I was like, all right, maybe there's a difference in they could have gone to any other. Are you aware of that trip? All right. Yeah. So back in 2021, Google and Amazon signed a joint contract with Israeli military.
Okay, sorry about that. So in some of the other schools, it's not even a requirement that like you have like passed the threshold of wealth. Like some of the schools are of the opinion that like if you need to borrow money to get this done, you should do it because there's so much ajr in the practice of the udhiyah, right? The udhiyah is particularly attached to Eid al-Adha, and it's done in relation to the Abrahamic narrative around sacrifice. There's a lot of hadith that speak about how, each individual, like bristle of hair on each, on the individual animal would like count as a reward. But the idea was like everybody should be engaged in this as best as they could be. And it created a mechanism for people to be able to participate in the consumption of something that otherwise they might not be able to afford. So I've been in a lot of refugee camps and conflict zones. Like Muslims practice Islam the same everywhere. Do you know what I mean? So there's Muslims right now who are in refugee camps in different parts of the world, and all they've eaten for months on end is like the same kind of rice and all this other stuff. My wife, she has a teacher who is in Gaza right now. Right, may Allah grant them ease and make us a generation that witnesses a free Palestine in our lifetime. And they were talking about Lebanon, right, in Arabic. And my wife afterwards was saying, there's so many conversations I've had with her where she starts off by saying, when we used to have this, right? Like when we used to have like milk, when we used to have cheese, when we used to have yogurt. Do you know what I mean? They don't have this stuff. Do you know? And so the idea of the udhiyah is not the fulfillment just of the individual responsibility, but it does become a mechanism through which people then receive this around the world in our country who otherwise like they just don't have access to some of the things that we might like. Literally, I love each of you so much, right? What did any of you have to do in this room right now to like go get the food that was there? Do you know what I mean? It just came to us, subhanallah. Do you know? Like the risk, it just comes. Do you see what I'm saying? Somebody ordered that, not thinking it was for you, but you're eating it. Do you know? Because it was for you to eat it. Do you get what I mean? Like Allah is the provider. The provision comes to us. The means through which certain things can kind of be allocated. You want to now think for yourself, like, why would I not want to be the means through which somebody who doesn't have food gets food? Do you know? So this particular like practice, the udhiyah, like it's much bigger than just the self. Do you see what I mean? And it has these particular requirements to it. There's other times when like a ritual slaughter is done also. Do you know? So say for example, if I made a mistake on Hajj, do you know? Or something that was a necessary part of the Hajj was left out. One of the things that's done, like if you were like hunting in your ihram, for example, you're not supposed to hunt in ihram. If you did, the way that you remedied that is that like you slaughter a sheep in Mecca. Do you know? It kind of serves as an expiation for the engagement of that action that's seen as like a major transgression. Do you see? So like the slaughter doesn't only happen, but the more kind of well known and prevalent engagement of this as a spiritual act takes place around this time of Eid al-Adha, where you do this thing. Does that make sense so far? Right? That's different from what is called the biha, right? The dhibha. That's a slaughtering practice. Like the slaughtering process is what we're referring to when we talk about the biha. So it's not like, you walk into a restaurant and somebody says, is this the biha halal or just halal, right? That's not a correct utilization of the term. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? All it is in reference to the actual slaughtering process. Do you get what I mean? Right? And it doesn't turn into this kind of like broader sense of terminology that people adopt largely in parts of the world where we live. And you wouldn't find it in a fiqh book because nobody was doing some of this stuff back in the day, right? In the ways that people do it today, kind of a monetization that creates mass production. But our religion creates ihsan in everything. So you want to have mindfulness even in your consumption, like how you eat and what you eat, and not just the quantity, but the quality, and not just the physical characteristics, but the metaphysical characteristics. So when you slaughter well, the hadith says. And for us, if you don't know how to slaughter, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't know how what you are eating was treated and raised, and whether there was humane treatment in that or not. Does that make sense? So I want to read through some of this and try to extrapolate from it, principally like where the ihsan elements come in. So if people want to pull up the PDF of the Ascent to Felicity, if you happen to have the book with you for any reason, which would be really interesting. We're looking at the chapter on ritually slaughtered animals, and it starts on page 173 in the translation that likely is what is going to pop up for everybody.
Sorry, what's the title again?
Ascent to Felicity. If you just Google Ascent to Felicity PDF, and there's like an archive.org account that'll show up. It'll pop up for people, and not page 173 on like the PDF, but 173 in the text. Does that make sense? On my PDF, it's page 168. Yeah. So I'm going to start reading just because I'll start to read. But once people have the text up, they can, I'd love for everybody else to read. So the Sheikh starts, Bismillah. Slaughtering is a condition for the permissibility of eating the meat of any animal except fish and locusts. The condition of its validity is that the one who performs it not be a Magian, apostate, or idol worshiper, and that he not intentionally omit the basmala when slaughtering. Right? And then the footnote here, legally there are two types of slaughtering: voluntary slaughtering, the dhabh, which is to actually sacrifice the animal by cutting its neck between the larynx and the chest and severing at least 3 of the 4 vessels mentioned above. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, just in a couple of paragraphs. And 2, forced slaughtering, slaid, which is hunting, right? Which is to wound the animal in any part of its body with a hunting animal or a sharp weapon, thereby spilling its blood. The general principle for killing animals for their meat is that one may not resort to forced slaughtering, i.e. hunting, unless one is forced to do so. That is, when one is unable to legally sacrifice the animal by voluntary slaughtering, the dhabh. Hence, if one hunted an animal that could have been ritually sacrificed, its meat would be unlawful. And on footnote number 2, if he forgetfully omits the basmala, however, it is permissible to eat the meat. So here you're going to get one principle that's important to just understand where there's different opinions, right? The verse in the Quran that says, do not eat other than that which has had the name of Allah uttered over it. This is where there's the two opinions. Some would say that means that you eat what has the name of the divine uttered over. When you slaughter, in our tradition, the invocation that you're making is Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, right? So you're taking the name of Allah. The other opinion says that if you eat something that did not have anything uttered over it, that means that you're not eating something that had other than the name of Allah, right? Somebody slaughtered something in the name of an idol, in the name of something that is rooted in like a shirk-based practice, right? This is what they're doing in the Meccan society. They are slaughtering animals in the name of Allah and Al-Uzza. Does that make sense? But here's where the different opinion lies. Can you eat something that has other than the name of Allah uttered over it? The answer is categorically no. Like you cannot have something that was sacrificed in the name of like some other named deity or divine entity, right? Can you have something that had nothing uttered over it? Is that permissible? Some people would say yes, and some people would say no. Does that make sense? On like the animals that you are allowed to eat. So you can never eat pork. And that might seem obvious, right? But you'll meet people who like their historical narrative has been ravaged through conflict and war. I know people who have experienced like all kinds of things as Kosovars, as Bosnians and others, and the purposeful targeting and killing of religious individuals and scholars, and generationally how things pass on, they just don't know, right? Like, and that's like a real thing. You see, it still doesn't make it permitted, right? But so the way somebody would say eating pork is not allowed, there are opinions, as this text is rooted in, that says eating something that did not have the name of Allah mentioned over it and was purposely omitted is unlawful to eat the way pork is unlawful to eat. Does that make sense so far? That's what this first paragraph is saying, that slaughtering is a condition. We're going to get into what the slaughtering is, and he describes it in the footnote a little bit. Who is the one that's doing the slaughtering is identified, that it cannot be these people, meaning it's got to be somebody who is a believing person of the book, a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew, invoking the name of the divine, and that you do not intentionally omit the basmala. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Does somebody want to continue reading from that second paragraph? Anybody have it? The slaughtering must take place at the throat. Yeah, go ahead.
The slaughtering must take place at the throat, cutting any three of the following four vessels: the trachea, the esophagus, and the two parotid arteries. If less than three of the four are severed, it is unlawful to eat the meat.
Okay, so here now where the ethic comes in, and this is things that are shown, like we're doing this, because of like the black letter of the law as well as the spirit of the law, right? So the cut goes at a horizontal. There's different opinions on could a vertical work or not. But most would say the horizontal is what you would have. And you have these three of these four main vessels, right? And what it's doing is impacting every level of functionality that is going on within the animal inside of that part of their being. And if you know anything about anatomy, there's certain ingredients to it that are just like there, whether we want to embrace it or not, they're there, right? So people who are serious about their spiritual diet, one bucket, for example, is like the company you keep. It's going to impact your spiritual existence, right? This is a hadith. The that a person
Is
is
it good
on the
now?
way of their friends, so be careful of the ones you befriend. Similarly, another ingredient, it's not that these two are absolute,
Is it working now?
but another ingredient that one would
Okay, I'm gonna
be
keep the mic right
mindful
here
of
instead
if
of on
they're
the table.
serious about the state of their heart is like what they consume. Do you know? Anybody
It's
who is serious
100%.
about their spirituality was serious about their eating habits.
All right then.
Not in a way that buys into like supremacist ideals of beauty that my consumption
again?
is attached to intentions of vanity. You're all beautiful. You know what I mean? And we know that you're beautiful because Allah said, "لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ," that we created humanity in the most beautiful of forms. And so, in understanding that this is like a very real part of this, it's super easy today to eat without thinking about what we're eating. Do you know? We have an amana towards you that you come here and you trust the food that we give to you. Do you get what I mean? The person at the restaurant that you go and eat at, they don't have that trust with you, you know, because they're not thinking about it that way. They're thinking about you as a dollar sign, do you know? So just because somebody tells you, hey, this is halal, right? It's not as simple as that. The preparation, the contamination, cross-contamination, ingredients, the cooking methods, all of this kind of stuff, you're putting that into your body, and your spiritual diet is deeply attached to your physical diet, right? If all I consume with my eyes and my ears is anger and violence and hate, it's going to impact my heart, right? So what you're drinking and eating is going to also impact your heart. Literally, like foods that make your heart physically hard, do you know? They're going to also have like a spiritual impact on your heart. Do you know what I mean? So if all I'm eating is stuff that's going to heighten like my cholesterol and clog up my arteries and it's screwing up my physical heart, why wouldn't it have an impact on your spiritual heart? Do you know? So you don't want to think about it purely through the prism of permissibility. Think about it through the prism of ethics in addition to permissibility, right? And a lot of the stuff that's easy to eat is probably not the stuff that we want to eat. Thinking about it now more broadly in this prism of ihsan, right? Why people like us want to know our religion is so that we go and build for people and populations that purposely have food deserts created in their parts of the city. It's not okay that you can go into low-income neighborhoods and there's more liquor stores than places that are serving like fresh fruit, that there's more like fast food franchises than places that are giving vegetables. But it's purposeful. If you can control the diet of a population, you can control the added ceilings that you create for them to be held down. A good friend of mine, Rami Nashishibi, may Allah preserve him, he runs the Inner City Muslim Action Network on the south side of Chicago. Is anybody familiar with Iman in Chicago? Have you heard of it before? Yeah, it's great. They do amazing work. They have an entire campus that they now have in the south side of Chicago, mental health, free clinic, reentry programs. One of the things these guys did in Ramadan, or they used to do, I don't know if they still do it, but I'm assuming that they do, they go to local bodegas and they give them fruit on the condition that instead of selling an orange for $5, they'd sell like 3 for $1. Do you see? So that people can now have access to something that wasn't meant to be at a premium. Do you know what I mean? This is ihsan. You're thinking about it in a different level. It's not just about how am I eating well, how am I making sure my neighbors are eating well. One of the reasons why we want to build our own space is because what we incubate here, alhamdulillah, has been great, but we also want to be in a place where we can build more that you fundamentally just can't do at a university apparatus. You need to have your own standalone institution. So we're able to start influencing how it is people around us are able to eat well and good quality and these kinds of things. in addition to us ourselves, right? We used to do iftars here on Mondays and Thursdays, and we'd serve like pizza every Monday and Thursday. I remember people remember that. We get like burgers from Crown Fried Chicken. Do you know what I mean? If you come to the iftars we were doing during the academic year, yogurt and fresh fruit cut up and all this kind of stuff. Your body needs to eat something well after it's been fasting for the entire day. Does that make sense? Right? Why is this important to understand? You might want to rethink if you're not eating like meat that's been slaughtered with the name of the divine uttered over it. Because one, there's a lot of variables at play that you just don't know who cooked what and what they put into it. Two, like you can eat at halal restaurants. In New York City, there's no shortage of it. You don't know what's happening in the back of that kitchen, man. I owned a restaurant. You know what I mean? And you get at, I don't know why I've done a lot of the things I've done in my life, right? But I've owned a butchery, I've owned a restaurant, I've been in the back of a lot of restaurants, a lot of butchers. It's crazy the kind of things people are doing because they fundamentally don't honor the rights of creation. They don't care about the animals that they're feeding you, and they don't care about you. There's no love in the process, right? Somebody stops and prays Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. They're not making it about themselves. They're bringing the divine into it. You see? And then there's just a different presence of barakah in the supply chain. Do you know? Does that make sense? Right? Our religion has like a lot of like benefit to it. I have friends who are shuyukh, like great scholars who are converts to Islam, and they say it's a mercy I can still eat the chicken that my mother serves me, who's not Muslim, because I can't eat the pork she serves me anymore, and it allows for me to still eat some of that. Islam is not just about me. It's about like a lot of other things. Some of us are not making difficult decisions with our spirituality in mind. We're just saying, I like the way it tastes. That's why I'm eating it. It's not a good reason to eat something. You know, like, yeah, you should enjoy it. Alhamdulillah. It's not that you want to make yourself miserable, but there's alternatives that exist to some of these things. You want to think about it at the level of your spiritual diet, right? Like, what is this thing that I'm eating doing to my heart and the state of my heart? And is it enough that it's permissible or simply that I enjoy the taste of it? It's got metaphysical implications also that go into play. Does that make sense? Yeah. Let's do this. I've been talking a lot. I know there's been a lot of other stuff that's been happening randomly. Why don't we turn to the people next to us? Maybe just talk a little bit about what we're taking away from tonight's conversation. And also, while you all do that, I'm just going to go check on this person that those two sisters had told me about. And I'll be back just in a little bit.